Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Julia Zimmerman, and I serve as the Program Officer for Education, Leadership, and Engagement here at Community Progress. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., and I encourage you to share your name and where you're signing in from in the chat. Community Progress webinars equip participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's webinar, we're joined by Kevin Windham, former member of the Missouri House of Representatives, Rachel Waterman, attorney at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, Charlie Hinderleiter, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at St. Louis Realtors, and Sarah Toring, Senior Fellow at the Center for Community Progress. Before turning it over to our speakers, I want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please submit your questions via the Q&A box below. We will share presentation slides and a video recording of today's presentation in the week following. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send an email to Julia Zimmerman at jzimmerman@communityprogress.org. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Julia. Welcome, everyone. So glad to be with you today. Welcome to our panelists. You're in for a real treat. Again, I'm Sarah. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for Community Progress, and I've had the great privilege of working with leaders like Representative Windham, Charlie Hinderleiter, and Rachel over many years. And just so excited for the conversation today and for y'all to hear the really remarkable thing that they have achieved and are achieving. I want to invite you to listen for two pieces of architecture today. The first has to do with legislation. And for those on the call who are as nerdy as me, you might hear wisdom about this legislation that comes from places like Georgia, like West Virginia, like Tennessee, other places around the country that have been seeking equitable and efficient property tax reform and land banking legislation around the country. Some of the docs, you're going to hear about that today. But I would also submit perhaps the more important architecture that these leaders will share with you about is the coalition building that they achieved over not months, but years, and step by step worked together in an expanding coalition, brought each of their gifts to bear to achieve, again, systemic reform in Missouri. So with that, I will turn it over to our excellent panelists. And first, Representative Kevin Windham, former rep from the 74th District. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So thank you to Center for Community Progress for having me and the coalition today. I appreciate it. It's been great working with you all. I appreciate all of the assistance throughout the years. So my name is Kevin Windham. For 6 years, I had the honor of representing the 74th District in the House of Representatives. I'm a lifelong St. Louis County resident, with the exception of college, which I spent in southeastern Missouri, and about a year in DC, working in the U.S. Senate. So I spent a little bit of time in policy making, but my journey in policy making started. I might say it probably started back when I lived in my great-grandmother's house as a youngster. We can go on to the next slide. There you can see me standing in front of my great-grandmother's house in Hillsdale, which she bought in 1969, and she took a ton of pride in. And over the years, the neighborhood sort of lost its luster in some areas. One obvious sign was across the street. There were a couple houses that went into tax delinquency and eventually were torn down shortly after this picture was taken. And in the bottom right, you can see a old photo of me and my great-grandmother. So they got me thinking, what can we do so that we wouldn't have so much vacancy and dilapidated houses in St. Louis County? So I should also say that we gave this presentation, the coalition, did a couple weeks ago, and it took a couple hours. So we're gonna cut it in half or a quarter, and then we're gonna hope that y'all ask questions that'll fill in the blanks. We can go on to the next slide. So tax delinquency is a big issue in St. Louis County, and even bigger than just tax delinquency in itself is that eventually homes spiral into a process where they end up in what we call the post third sale list, where they are houses that go up for tax sale at least 3 times and don't sell. So that kind of shows you that the market is rejecting those homes. So this is a photo of or a snapshot at one point in time of the tax delinquency in St. Louis County. It's much more pronounced in North County and Mid County than it is in the South County, or especially in West County. There are some in South County, but you can see that it's more pronounced in North County. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see homes that are on the post third sale list, which, like I said, go up for tax sale and don't sell at least 3 times. So again, much more pronounced in North County. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see one specific neighborhood, which you would think that there are a lot of homes in this area, but this is just about 3,000 people live in this area, and as you can see, it's quite a bit of tax delinquent houses. I don't know the exact number, but I don't know. I guess 100. Okay, it's on the slide right there. So I try not to read the slides, and that's my detriment on that one. So 190 out of 3,000 folks about 3,000 folks that live in Castle Point. And one thing to note about St. Louis County that made the policymaking process and even the community engagement process a little bit more interesting is that we have over 80 municipalities and portions of St. Louis County that are not incorporated, meaning they are governed by St. Louis County government. And Castle Point is one of those areas that are governed by St. Louis County government, meaning it's unincorporated. And for the sake of brevity, I'll stop there and I'll pass it over to Charlie.
To me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll pass it back to Rachel.
You're good. Hey, everybody. Oh, I forgot about this one. This is our coalition. We can talk about that in a minute. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Sorry, y'all. So I'm Rachel. I'm an attorney at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. We're a traditional legal aid organization. My team that I work on, which is called the Neighborhood Advocacy Program, is not maybe your traditional legal aid program. Our entire legal practice focuses on vacant and abandoned property. That's our little team down there. So we have 6 staff attorneys now. We've grown a lot. I think partially because there is such a large problem with vacant and abandoned property in the St. Louis region. So a little bit about the role of legal aid attorneys in your possible coalition building. If you have local legal aid, which almost everybody should, they're going to be partially funded by the federal government, and which is going to mean there's a lot of restrictions about what they can do around legislative advocacy and activity. But at the request of a local elected official, they can provide comments and explanation around legislation. So Kevin provided that request to our office, and that allowed us to work on this project, which was an extremely rewarding project. So just know that your legal aid attorneys in your state or in your city can be a good resource if you are thinking about a legislative project. Even if it's not their area of expertise, they're going to be really good at looking at laws and even just explaining them to you if it's something that you need help with. So to that end, when Kevin first came to our office and said, hey, we have all these vacant and abandoned properties, the first step for us was linking that problem to tax enforcement. So a lot of people just say vacant and abandoned properties are a problem, let's get them rehabbed. It's unfortunately not usually that simple because these are so linked to your local government's tax foreclosure process or tax enforcement process or property tax, whatever you want to call it, it has to do with property taxes. So a lot of people, the original idea was land banking. How do we start a land bank? And our job as lawyers was to educate about the connection between tax enforcement and land banking. So step one is always your tax enforcement system, and step two is land banking. And step one, the quality of your step one is going to be largely determinative of the quality of your step two. So that was a big part of the educational piece and also the legislative drafting. In Missouri, I'm going to try not to go too far into the weeds, but we already had 2 existing tax enforcement systems on the books in Missouri. One was an administrative lien sale and the other one was a judicial tax sale. St. Louis County and all the rest of Missouri was using that administrative lien sale. The judicial tax sale, which I'll explain the benefits of, was only being used by 1 county. And our goal was to figure out how other counties could utilize that. So why might they want to utilize the judicial tax sale system? It's because of a lot of the problems that are associated with the tax lien sale process. So if any of you live in states with tax lien sales, probably some of these problems are going to be familiar to you. The number one problem that Kevin was talking about is that taxes pile up forever. There's no endpoint if no one wants to buy the tax lien. So those post-third properties, those are properties that, like Kevin said, have gone up for auction multiple times. Market has rejected them. There's no endpoint, so the taxes just keep getting billed and the property gets less and less marketable. In our system, it's the bidder's job to foreclose. If they aren't able to collect the taxes once they buy the lien, then they have to do basically a private foreclosure of those taxes. They either have to hire an attorney to do that or know how to do it themselves. That either means a lot of specialized knowledge or a lot of money. So it makes it even less attractive to invest in properties that already might not be good investment opportunities. You might never get the property. If the owner comes back and pays their taxes, then that's that. Your tax lien is paid off and you don't end up with the property. That uncertainty leads to lack of investment. Might never get clear title to the property. In our system, there's some case law that suggests that federal liens cannot be cleared and that our sewer liens, we have really intense sewer liens in St. Louis County, cannot be cleared by that administrative process no matter what. So you're looking at unlikelihood of getting any clear title if you have those types of liens. And then we have these over-the-counter post-third sales that Kevin was talking about, in which a property can just be sold with 0 notice to lien holders. So there's folks who are interested parties and they should be getting constitutional notice of any type of sale. And in our system, that's not happening. So you have sort of maybe irresolvable constitutional issues with the title there. So because of all those problems, with the current legislation, we said, how might more counties be able to use the better legislation, which is the judicial tax sale? And we're lucky that we already had this on the books. It just wasn't being widely used. And why might a county want to use judicial tax sales? First, it's that constitutional due process piece, which means the parties are getting better notice, and to all interested parties instead of just the owner on the record or whoever the county happens to dig up in their casual search of the property title. In this case, you're doing a full title search and making sure that all interested parties that show up on that title search are getting notice before a property ever goes to auction. The goal of that is to end up with clear title at the end of the process, which is going to bring more investment into your tax sale process. Homeowners, good for them too, because they're more likely to get more and better warnings that their house is going to go up for tax auction, more opportunities to redeem before the auction. And in this case, it's easier to establish tax assistance funds. So we have a St. Louis City, St. Louis County divide, and they're actually divided on use of lien sales and judicial tax foreclosure, which actually leads to this weird outcome where St. Louis City, using judicial tax sale, has a tax assistance fund. So people can call in, and if they can't afford their taxes, they can get support. That's because there's an endpoint. So, you know, paying off someone's 2 or 3 years of taxes is easier than paying off in the county what could be 8 to 10 years of taxes. So there is no tax assistance fund in the county. That feels really unfair to folks who live in this region. For the community, Lots of benefits. Buyers can buy property with clear title at tax auction, rehab without major legal hurdles. Abandoned properties that receive no minimum bid at auction. So it's basically those post-third properties that are currently getting rejected by the market. Now those can come into a land bank. So really the takeaway for us was land banking is such a small part of the legislative project here. We have to get through all of that judicial tax sale stuff before we get to the fun land bank. When drafting, we sort of discussed a lot as a coalition what this legislation could look like. And what we came up with is legislation that is fully optional. So it gives counties the ability to use that judicial foreclosure system, but doesn't require them to use it. So it's a partial opt-in. They can use judicial foreclosure as much or as little as they want on a parcel by parcel basis. So like I said, we are lucky to have those two systems in place. And what the legislation does is allow a county that's already using the lien sale to just dabble in the judicial tax liens, judicial tax foreclosures as much or as little. And the idea being, hopefully, if people like it, which Sarah assured us in Georgia, people have liked it. We got this idea from Sarah from Georgia, where they were doing this, and over time, slowly but surely, the benefits of the judicial sales become more clear. And it incentivizes counties to use that process more. We didn't think that folks would be excited about a wholesale shift to a whole new process right off the bat. And then this legislation also allows cities within counties using judicial foreclosure to establish land banks. So you got the counties who are using, and then the cities have land banks. Or in St. Louis County, we have a countywide land bank. That's just a special thing because of all the municipalities that Kevin mentioned. So a big part of the educational process was emphasizing this idea of clear title, which is what we're really looking for, and which is one of the reasons that you see so many vacant and abandoned properties, is because it's hard to get clear title, and without clear title, you're not going to see reinvestment. So connecting that concept of clear title to judicial tax foreclosures was really important, because a lot of people do have an understanding of the importance of clear title, people who work in real estate, people who are investing. And so when people were learning about this ability to clear title, it was, I think, really attractive. Because like I mentioned here, no need for a quiet title lawsuit. A lot of people were just paying for quiet titles for everything that they bought at tax sale, which is both frustrating and expensive. With clear title, the land bank can also work to transform these vacant and abandoned properties, because the same process that's clearing title for investors is also clearing title for the land bank. You can wipe out the tax debt once the property is in the land bank, and that is a potential solution to these properties that are stuck in that sort of post-third limbo. Another thing that we talked about a lot was setting these new land banks apart from existing land banks. So the coalition was, very aware of what land banks already existed in Missouri, and that was the Kansas City Land Bank and the St. Louis City Land Bank. And both of those, maybe not to our detriment, were involved in some form of scandal throughout our coalition process. So I just went to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and searched land bank and grabbed some of the headlines, which you'll see here. Both corruption and just skepticism about the ability of the land banks to deal with the number of vacant and abandoned properties. So one of our inventions in this legislation was to make it partial opt-in, which means that the land bank isn't ending up with everything, which is what was happening in St. Louis City and Kansas City, which is why the city, which is the LRA, which you'll see in these headlines, had 12,000 properties. So we emphasize that this legislation is a different type of land bank, a new generation. Fewer properties, clearer title, more oversight, more revenue. There's also sort of funding streams baked into the legislation that can hopefully fund the land bank long term. More oversight, some anti-corruption things that went in there, probably mostly motivated by these headlines, and then the clear title stuff we went over, and then the partial opt-in leading to fewer properties. So sort of a land bank 3.0 is often how the coalition talked about it. All right. With that, I will hand it over to Charlie.
All right, so this coalition has been meeting almost every other Friday since March 5th, 2021. And this is an example of one of those Zoom meetings. And what's weird is that's actually, I think, swift in terms of getting something like this done. We passed legislation the second year it was introduced in the Missouri General Assembly. 3 years to never is the average, with never being the most likely outcome. The idea for this, or the seed for the coalition, I think came in the fall of 2020, where I had a chat with Representative Wyndham, who talked about land banks, and I talked to Peter Hoffman, who's one of Rachel's colleagues, who talked about land banks. And I connected the two of them, as well as with Missouri Realtors, and that was kind of the genesis of this. Rachel pulled us together and has the cadence, I think, has been a key piece of this success, where Rachel has just been making sure that we're meeting every other Friday for years on end at this point. But making sure that there's that regular attention and focus, I think, has been one of the things that's made this successful, to the point where the governor of Missouri signed this into legislation last year, which meant it took effect in August of last year. And we have, I think, a lovely photo of that bill signing with a number of our coalition members there in that photo. And that's the end of the slides that I think are relevant for this. But for us, I think some of the key pieces of what made this coalition so successful was having the passion and the vision of Representative Wyndham with the expertise of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, and quickly bringing together other groups that were housing advocates or other groups that had key community connections in St. Louis County. So very quickly, this kind of grew with the Housing Partnership and Beyond Housing and a number of other groups in the St. Louis County area, where originally we were just focused on St. Louis County and how do we address the issue for this jurisdiction. We were very grateful to have the Center for Community Progress to give a technical assistance grant, and so CCP has been walking alongside us this whole time. So that combination of Legal Service of Eastern Missouri and Center for Community Progress is fundamental. That's how we were able to write such good policy and legislation. But good policy and legislation that you can't pass doesn't mean much. And I think that's where the political muscle was critically important. And I think that was where the realtors came in. I'm the political hack of the coalition. So we had the passion and leadership with Representative Wyndham. We had the expertise with CCP and Legal Service of Eastern Missouri. But Missouri Realtors brought a critical component of some lobbying muscle that really was key. One of the things that I think set this coalition apart early on was the amount of community engagement that we did. Going to public events, creating our own events, bring people together. And that also included those local government leaders, municipal leaders. As Representative Wyndham mentioned, we have, I think we're at 87 right now. But 22 of those munis are 1,000 people or less. So a lot of these are very small and don't have a lot of capacity. So how we were able to engage with them, as well as county council members. Because right now, this legislation is state authorizing. As Rachel said, it's optional. Now local governments have to implement it. So now we're going through the process right now of St. Louis County passing legislation to make this a reality for St. Louis County. We were able to engage with some of those council members 3-4 years ago, so that we brought them along with us, so that they were supportive. And now when it's time to implement, we're ready to go. Representative Wyndham was in the minority party in the Missouri General Assembly. We have supermajority Republican state House, state Senate, and gubernatorial control. So one of the key pieces was adding a Republican co-sponsor. We had Representative Bill Owen out of Springfield, who became a great champion of this. He actually filed land bank legislation, but again, didn't really understand the issue to the degree that this coalition had brought that level of sophistication. So to me, one of the most memorable meetings of this process was in Jefferson City, where we had Representative Wyndham and Representative Owen and Rachel and her colleague Peter Hoffman. I was there as window dressing, I'm pretty sure. But it was awesome because what we had is two legislators that came together and said, we're setting ego aside. We just want what's best for our community. We don't care who gets credit. We just want this to work. And it was fantastic as Rachel and Peter walked Representative Owen through the bill. We used the St. Louis County bill in its entirety. But it was one where then he understood exactly why we were doing what we were doing. And now we have a coalition that has St. Louis County, but it also has Springfield, which is another one of the major jurisdictions in the state. We now have bipartisan support. And I think that was one of the key pieces of success. This is something that we have a serious issue with in St. Louis County, particularly North St. Louis County. But I think Representative Owen's favorite example was Ash Grove, Missouri, where they've got 3 homes that are vacant that are really bugging that community. It's a very different scale, but it's still a problem that's impacting their community too. So how do we make sure that we've got a tool that everybody can use and adapt it to what they need? We're St. Louis County, that's going to be a much larger scale, but for some other jurisdictions, that's going to look very different. And so this legislation really gave flexibility so that local governments are able to tailor that to what they need to do. But in terms of the coalition success, I think those assets were key. It's expertise. It's having legal services and Center for Community Progress. It's having those community groups that bring the stories of this is what it looks like from the neighborhood perspective. It's having that community connection so that when we needed community members to reach out to legislators, they were able to do that. And the lobbying and the resources certainly helped as well. Missouri Realtors has a lobbyist, Sam Licklider, that's been doing this for 55 years for us. Everybody in the Capitol knows him. Having that lobbying muscle was certainly helpful. The Realtors were also able to bring some resources. In the resources tab, you'll see a video. I got to say that the Zoom meetings where we went over the first draft of the legislation that was 170 pages, not the most exciting Zoom meetings. The Zoom meetings where we did storyboarding for the animated video, much cooler. There was a grant that wasn't Realtor funded that was that first piece for that first video that I think was critical because this is a concept that is dense. I think everybody can get pretty quickly why it's important. But when you say partial opt-in to a judicial tax foreclosure process, people's eyes have already glazed over. So that animated video in a way that really summarizes this succinctly, I think was a critical asset for us. We were able to use grants from Missouri Realtors and the National Association of Realtors to create a second video that was more focused on outstate folks. We were able to do some targeted ads in districts that had high levels of vacancy, as well as legislators that were critical to the process. So we were able to really deliver some digital assets across the state. You can see a couple of different websites that were created. Again, one St. Louis County focused, one more Missouri focused, but these were just more ways that we were able to, in a sophisticated manner, have those touch points with legislators as well as with folks in their community so that we really did have people, you know, that are going to be impacted by this reaching out to legislators. And I think that's really, at least from my perspective, kind of the key pieces of what made this coalition work. Rep. Wyndham, I'm curious to hear what other pieces you might add to that.
No, I just glanced up at myself in the Zoom screen and saw myself smirking, and I haven't had the pleasure of having any kids yet, but I'm thinking that like that's what a proud dad would look like, seeing his kid kick a soccer goal.
Well, thank you, all of you. I want to lift up and kind of underscore +4 on the videos. I think that one of the things that's so wonderful about what you all have achieved is that others around the country who are listening in, learning today, now have kind of a playbook and some examples to start from. So if and when Oklahoma is working on an animation storyboard, there's going to be examples, right, that they can start from. And that is also a contribution to the larger field nationally that this process and your coalition has offered. Curious to ask each of you or whoever wants to chime in. So I'm guessing that occasionally Missouri has politics. Maybe not. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about kind of the political dynamics, both we've got state level, right? But then county level, and then at these local municipalities. Any similarities amongst those levels, words to the wise, as folks are starting to engage different levels of our governmental systems in a state, right, around something like this?
I'll jump on that first. So last year, we were able to pass this legislation. Last year was the lowest number of bills the Missouri General Assembly's ever passed. It was a remarkable year in terms of how little got done. Our Missouri Senate had kind of divided almost into 3 parties. You had the Democrats, the quote unquote regular Republicans, and then the Freedom Caucus. And the Freedom Caucus actually did impact this. We had one member of the Freedom Caucus that had some very specific and strange things he wanted. He still voted no, but he didn't filibuster it. So we had to make some accommodations to suit those needs that at the end of the day weren't major pieces. But our bill did get filibustered at least once, not based on anything to do with our bill, but somebody just wanted to abolish personal property taxes in the state of Missouri, and they just decided that our bill was the time to talk about that. So we absolutely had to navigate some complicated politics in the state of Missouri, but getting that through last year was just enormous. In terms of local, in St. Louis County right now, we've got a county council and a county executive that do not like each other. The county council's got 7 members and 6 of them really don't like the county executive. And we've been able to navigate that so far where we will probably have 5, if not all 7 of the council members vote for our legislation, and the county executive supports it and lobbied for it in Jeff City. Also, the General Assembly doesn't like our county executive either, so that didn't always help. But it was absolutely some complex within St. Louis County, within the General Assembly. But at the end of the day, what we had was good policy that was going to make good change. We had a variety of messengers. We had Republicans, we had Democrats, we had folks from outstate, we had folks from St. Louis. It was who was the right person to send to talk to that legislator. And because we had so many different people in the coalition, that really helped. So part of it was the diversity in the coalition, and also just the soundness of the policy and educating folks, because it was just, again, I think it took me 6 months of Zoom meetings before I understood what on earth Rachel was talking about. Repetition is certainly critical.
Rep. Wyndham, any comments you have on that in terms of obviously really at the state level, or any kind of words to the wise for folks?
Yeah, no, I was gonna leave it alone to make for more questions because Charlie really hit a home run on that one. But I think that really it's all about just measuring and trying to analyze what's going on in your individual situation, right? Because not every state's gonna have a state legislature with such drastic partisan differences, or a county council that hates the county executive, or even be in a county that has so many municipalities. But I think that as long as you have folks, I guess it's kind of a plug for CCP. As long as you have folks there that have been through the process and kind of know not only the policy, but kind of how to navigate different situations and different logistical differences, I think helps out a lot.
I will say, at least from my vantage point in cheerleading along the process, the piece about the humility that I saw all of the leaders of this coalition bring, it really is a superpower, right? And that has been my experience in other places that have achieved this kind of systemic reform. Last question from me, and then we'll turn to our audience. I'm curious, from your particular vantage point and role, what did you learn, right? What surprised you about this process? Was there ever a moment you're like, yeah, this is impossible, and then it happened?
I'll go with a stupid answer to buy them time to think about a real one. What I didn't expect was I met Kevin's dad. I met both the Rachel's parents, and I think they both met my mom. Like, it became a family affair. Like, this is a coalition that I think really grew kind of pretty close. And that I did not see coming. I've been involved in a lot of coalitions and I'm currently involved in a lot of coalitions. This one just had a different flavor.
You want to go, Rachel, or you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple. I probably have like 2 or 3. And they came to me, they've been coming to me. One came to me right as soon as you asked the question. One came to me once Charlie started speaking, and one will probably come to me as I give the answer. So one is Charlie talked about the fun and good stuff. One time I thought that I didn't necessarily think that the bill was dead, but one hurdle that we had as a coalition was, I say probably a breach in communication that might have ended in some hurt feelings or a little bit of lost trust. But then we quickly was able to rebound from that and regather and probably came out even stronger from it. So that just speaks to being in good communication and good collaboration with the folks that you're collaborating with. Another is, I'm trying to think of a political way to explain this situation. So
You're a former legislator. You don't have to do that anymore.
yeah, but I try not to be too, out there still. So I was in Las Vegas for a conference. I remember exactly where I was, and I was on the phone with a drafter in Jefferson City, and they said, well, Bill Owen just came in and he said that we're not doing what you want anymore. We're doing what he wants, and the band is broken up, and it's two different bills now, and he doesn't. It's over basically. And I was like, oh, okay. I kind of laughed because she said the band is broken up, and I thought that was a really funny way of saying it. But at the same time, I almost wanted to cry. And that was before the meeting that Charlie spoke about, where we came together in Jeff City and we all got our minds around the issue and was able to hash it all out. So it all ended up all right in the end. But that may have ruined my Las Vegas trip, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, I'll keep it at 2 to keep it short.
Oh my gosh, you guys have me thinking about so many fun things over the past 5 years. My parents are St. Louis County residents, so they're very engaged in the legislative process, which is why they've met all the coalition members. Things that surprise me, I mean, so many. One thing that I think I get like the proud parent look that Kevin was talking about is how the appetite for everyone in the coalition and beyond to learn the details of this legislation and tax foreclosure in particular and clear title. Like now Bill Owen will call me on the phone and say, why don't people get this clear title stuff? I've been telling them about it, which is something we taught him about maybe 3 years ago now. And there's so many people who are now conversational. Charlie is so humble. He says he took him 6 months to get it, but he's conversational in the clear title and tax foreclosure, just like I am. And I think that's another thing that Sarah pointed out, but that I think came to us naturally, but was surprising how important it was everyone's humility. Like everyone in this coalition really hypes each other up and downplays their own role in this. And I think that, Charlie always says it was sound policy that got us where we are, but we wouldn't have passed anything without Charlie and the realtors, St. Louis realtors, Missouri realtors. And Kevin always gives us credit, whereas, he's the one who ran for office and got himself into a position where he could actually introduce and pass legislation. So that has been something that has been really important throughout the process, and something that I didn't, even think of as being a key ingredient, but it really is, and it has made us all good friends, I think.
Humility is contagious, it turns out. We've got some really good questions in the chat, and I'm going to do my best, friends, to get to as many of them as possible. But let's see, a couple of folks, anything you had to let go of in the legislation? And then can you talk a little bit about where we're at in terms of implementation? How many counties are considering it, or local municipalities?
I'll take one of the questions. And I forgot which one it was. What was the first question you asked, Sarah?
Anything you had to give up in the legislative process?
The first thing that we had to give up almost immediately was one of our revenue sources. We wanted to have a $1 recording fee for all things recorded in the state of Missouri to go into a land bank fund, and then those funds to be able to be dispersed to all the land banks through the state. But we quickly found out that was a non-starter.
Yeah, Missouri realtors took that one out. Sorry, guys.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of implementation, St. Louis County and Springfield are both working on this, and Rachel can speak more to that. But one of the things that I think that Legal Services has done really well is they've gone to the Missouri Foundation for Health to get a grant. And this is something that Peter Hoffman, Rachel's colleague, is, I think, a master at. It's not just passing legislation. I'm a lobbyist. I pass it, I move on. Peter's been very focused on implementation and how do you do that well. And I think that is remarkably important in this realm. So, having resources to help jurisdictions get these stood up and do it well and do it correctly is huge.
There were a couple other minor things that throughout the legislative process were negotiated out of the bill, like land banks as ability to hold property long-term or rent property or lease it. That was the Freedom Caucus that Charlie talked about. And a couple other maybe limitations on what kind of parcels the land banks can acquire location-wise. But nothing that devastated us. So that was good. What was the next one?
And I can recall, oh, go ahead, Rachel, sorry.
No, do you want to follow up on that?
Well, just, I'm curious, I recall sometimes it's good to have some stuff in your back pocket that you might not care about that much, but other folks might care about that. Okay, yep, we will be happy to let that go if we must, right?
Totally. Yeah, a good tactic is to frill your bill to the nines so that, if things have to go, you still have a lot of good left. Implementation, Charlie mentioned that both Springfield, Greene County and St. Louis County are at the forefront. No one has yet passed enabling legislation, but that's another thing that if you have a local legal aid, you can request at the local level as enabling ordinances and that kind of thing. So there's a county council person who's reached out to our office, so we've been able to help with that as well, which is great.
So I'm going to do my best to kind of merge a couple of other topics that are being raised. One is the importance or role that kind of the housing affordability, housing development community played in this process. So that's one. But linked to that, a lot of us here, nerds here, kind of understand the links between tax delinquency and shaping our neighborhoods. But how did y'all convince others that this is the issue worth spending time on when housing affordability is a crisis really everywhere that I've been in recent years? So the presence of those housing folks in the process, and then just sort of making that case between tax delinquency as something that coalition should focus on. Who cares about housing?
I'll start there. I think that the housing community had a pretty big impact on the work that we were doing, in that we have some pretty distinct areas in the county. So like I said, North County, I think that one can drive through North County and tell the difference from North County, West County, and South County. So we had neighborhood groups from North County, Mid County, and South County join us throughout the fight, if you will. And then we also we leaned on them in not only telling the story and showing us what houses could be torn down or renovated, but also bringing home what we were trying to message and really honing in on our message. So that was good, and they brought a lot of authenticity and credibility to the work. And that, a politician, a lawyer, and a lobbyist wouldn't be able to bring. So, and then how did we convince folks? I think that I probably answered that in the first part. I think that those community members and those housing groups really were able to convince folks, on top of the really awesome video. So that's another plug for the video.
I think a piece of it is that if this succeeds, virtually everybody wins. Realtors have more houses to sell. Community members get stronger communities. Neighborhood groups thrive more. You have more housing inventory. My members really want that. Lenders have more mortgages that they can make. Literally the only people I could think of that lose in this are lawyers that work on the tax sales. And the lawyer in our area that is the expert in the tax sales was a member of the coalition. Like literally the only guy I can figure out that's going to hurt, this is going to hurt, was helping us. So it's one where once you get past the what on earth is this thing, I think virtually everybody benefits from this. It's stronger communities, it's more housing. And right now in a time where I think everybody needs more housing, how do you find housing that already exists, that already has the infrastructure, and you bring that back to life?
And I think another key part of making this sort of tax enforcement piece matter is, like Charlie said earlier, is just repetition, and that it often links back to other things that people care about. So like people would say, well, why are we working on this? Why aren't we focusing on demolitions? There's a lot of properties that already need to be demolished in the neighborhood. And tax enforcement is linked to that in the same way as, like, well, if the local government does demolish, they don't have any vehicle to then bring that property into their inventory if they don't have a functional tax enforcement and land banking system. So I think that there are so many links to other housing issues, and then just repeating how all of this stuff can work through the tax enforcement system, that helped a lot.
Can you make it plain? And maybe Rachel, this is for you. So now if a county opts into using the judicial system on a parcel by parcel basis, so we get clean, clear title at the end, and if no one bids, that parcel can go into a locally created land bank. And then what, if any, superpowers does that land bank have to work with nonprofit affordable housing developers, for example?
The land bank can, choose to work with buyers that are in line with the land bank's goals and priorities. So the land bank, which does not exist yet, will set its bylaws, will set its priorities. And I think that will allow it to better align sort of property distribution with those affordable housing goals or whatever types of goals the community has. You made me think of something. Oh, Kevin likes to talk about this too, which is that the land bank also has specific powers in the legislation to, one, filter types of buyers. So if buyers own other tax delinquent properties or other code violating properties, they can be ineligible for purchase. And then it can attach performance-based deeds of trust, basically obligations when it sells the property that you have to fix up the property. And if you don't, the land bank can foreclose and bring the property back into its inventory. So those sort of checks and balances to really make sure that the land bank is carrying out its purpose, which is to get these properties back to reuse. So those are special powers in the legislation itself that help bring that to life.
So good reuse could mean best use for the community as opposed to highest purchase price. Those things could correlate. It could be the highest purchase price, but it's not required to be. Do I have that right? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of my friends from West Virginia has asked, we struggle here in West Virginia with community engagement. Folks want the government to do something, but they don't trust the government to do something. And it's hard to get them to engage on a positive level. How did y'all overcome some of that, if you faced any of it?
That's a good question. You want to go with it first, Sean?
Not really. You want to go first?
Yeah, I go first. So it's easier said than done, but I think that I wouldn't say the first step, but potentially the first step, it might have been the first step in our case, is finding a politician that's not the government, right? So again, that's easier said than done, but once you have somebody that has either built a reputation in the community for being a stalwart on whatever issues, but maybe specifically in this case, housing issues, to the point where they're not an elected official. That's Joe or Jane, or someone that's just so new and young that folks don't even believe that they can do it or will do it, like me, maybe. So I think that that's one take at it, is finding a politician that doesn't reek of politics yet. And if not that, then I think that mobilizing around the issue, or nailing down on the issue and getting super specific, which maybe I did that with saying land banking, as opposed to housing reform generally, or something else that may have been narrow, like property tax reform, that wasn't quite as interesting or eclectic of a thought, some might think, as land bank. So I think that those are a couple of things. I think that the word land bank might excite people more than property tax foreclosure.
We had one consistent opponent, which was the Show Me Institute, a conservative think tank based out of St. Louis. And their argument basically is the government shouldn't be doing this. And the way you can implement it looks different. Like Springfield, Missouri is looking to implement this where the land bank lives in city government, whereas St. Louis County is looking to do this where the land bank will be a quasi-governmental body, but it will be an independent entity. So, if there's less trust in government, having it be less government might be a part of that. But at the end of the day, and Rachel, I think, is very good about this, is it market-based solutions. Just repeat that phrase over and over, because at the end of the day, what we're looking at is, at least here in Missouri, a broken property tax foreclosure process. So we're improving private property rights. The notice people are given is better for constitutional protection for personal private property. That's something I think that resonates on the right. But it's also, what we're doing is taking these properties and getting them back to market. How do we get somebody that can buy it, rehab it, live in it? I think that's something that will resonate with folks that tend to be a little bit more conservative. How do we let the market work in the way it should work? At the end of the day, a land bank is a holder of last resort and a marketing agency. It's, hey, somebody come buy this, get it back on the tax rolls. I think that's something that can resonate with folks across the political spectrum.
Something that is, that I think there's no shortcut to building trust. So unfortunately, it's just time and consistency and honesty and humility. Something that I think has helped us a lot is that all three of us, more or less until Kevin left the legislature, have stayed in our roles. I think in like nonprofit work and policy work, there can be and tends to be a lot of turnover, and that can interrupt the community's trust building process. So sort of taking care of yourself if you're in this work so that you can stay present with the community for a longer term, that's going to help a lot. And then vacancy to occupancy is such like a attractive, positive issue. I've found it's something that helps me do this work long term, is that it does give people sort of a positive vision to coalesce around. So maybe if you're struggling to choose which issues around housing to focus on, looking for one that is sort of transformational in that way can sort of build some positive engagement with the community.
And to be fair, Representative Wyndham made it through passage of the bill, did the mic drop, and then left.
Yeah. So to kind of put a bow on my comments from earlier, get you a Charlie and a Rachel that aren't government, right? Charlie is the folks that want to get the folks to buy houses. So he basically is the private market in one way. And Rachel's kind of the government, right? But she's a do-good lawyer. She's not like the bad government lawyer.
So,
Realtor associations bring good resources. If you can get the realtors involved, that helps.
Yeah. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'm curious if you all could each just reflect on what are you most hopeful about going forward with this work?
Y'all gonna make me go first again?
Nah, I got it. At the end of the day, it's getting people in homes. It's strengthening communities. It's bringing vacant properties back to life in a time when we need more housing. I think that's the crux. I think it's one where, holy cow, this is in the weeds stuff. But at high level, we're giving people places to live and giving communities the ability to thrive again. And that's just awesome.
Agreed. It's kind of a simple thing to, have hope in, but something that even makes me like more hopeful about it is it's in the communities where I grew up. So, I plan to stay in St. Louis. My parents are still in North County, and being able to see that positive change over the next decades to come, I'm really excited about that. It's going to be awesome.
What excites me most about this? So I've already been super excited about just kind of winning these first couple battles in this long war. So I'm kind of just happy that we're here at this point, but I'm also pretty satisfied in knowing that we explained a very complex process to some folks that don't usually enjoy listening to complex processes. That's a little bit of shade at the Missouri legislature. And we came out of it pretty well. So I think that what most excites me about the work that we've already done is the work that we'll continue to do, because I've said a few times in our presentations that this isn't the silver bullet to the issue in St. Louis County, but it's one tool in the toolbox to rectifying the issue that we have. So very excited about all the work that we'll do going forward.
Well, congratulations. And thank you to each of you also for taking the time and really sharing your story with the community here. Just for me, it's very hopeful just to be learning from you all still in coalition with one another, because you're plainly still in coalition with one another and working together. And I know for one thing, good policy is not done alone. So thank you, Julia. I don't know if you had a couple of housekeeping things. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for such an amazing webinar. I think I'm feeling inspired. I hope everyone else is feeling inspired in the chat. I think from the Q&A box and from the chat, people definitely are. We'll be sending out a follow-up email in the next week or so with a recording of this webinar and the slides and the resources that you can find in the resources tab right now. So be on the lookout for that. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much.